All, welcome to the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting. Just go through the agenda here. Apologies, we have one leave of absence from Councillor Burnett, and we have one person to co-opt. So would someone like to move that? Alderman Barakis, that we co-opt Damon Thomas? No objections? Okay, thanks, Alderman Thomas, you're in.
Okay, thank you.
Would somebody like to move the minutes? Moved by Alderman Barakis. No objections to the minutes? No, declare those carried. Item 3, consideration of supplementaries. We don't have any. Item 4, indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. No, there's no transfer of items unless someone wants to shuffle things around. No, we're good. All right. Reports. 6.1 is e-scooter trial consultation report, and we have our manager of Sustainable Hobart and our director as well. So I'll throw it over to the director and the manager for e-scooter trial to give us an introduction if you'd like. Either toss up a coin if you want.
Okay, thank you, through you, Chair. We were asked by Council the 31st of January to undertake certain consultations, particularly with the elderly community in Tasmania and with the disabled community and with the Tasmania Police. And this report is to document those consultations. We had a consultation on 24th of February with senior Tasmanians at Bathurst House. We had an engagement with the disabled community at Town Hall on the 30th of March 2022, and we have had ongoing meetings all the way through the trial with Tasmania Police, and so we didn't have any extra meetings with them, but we do meet with them monthly, and the meetings sort of outlined here from 8th of February, 10th of March, 4th of April and 3rd of May. There was another one today, but that obviously didn't get into this report. In general, the consultations were very positive. The feedback from the senior Tasmanians at Bathurst House were, in general, people were very happy with the trial. There were some people who had concerns, more than anything, around scooters being left on footpaths, which is an ongoing issue that we've been dealing with the providers, and also with the costs of the trial, which we were able to explain the trial happened cost-free for council, so there were no costs to the city. In fact, the city would make a revenue out of the trial. Then, interestingly, the bulk of the comments from the senior Tasmanians were them really being interested in how they can become involved in the trial and wanting to know how they could learn to ride scooters and that sort of thing. So that was a really interesting feedback from that group. The group at Town Hall on the 30th of March, we had Beam and Neuron, and then a couple of representatives from the disabled community speaking, and then it was presented by my unit, the Smart Sustainable Hobart unit, and we had a long session there, about 2 hours, where people were able to ask questions from the floor and listen to the presentations given by the city, by the two operators, and by a member of the blind community. And that was there was also DSG represented there, and a large number of disabled community representatives and the disabled community themselves.
All right. So it sounds like it's been a successful consultation.
It was a successful consultation, and one of the things that came out of that was going on anyway was planned in any case was DSG is running a series of community workshops in Launceston and Hobart, so a round table which allows the disabled community to comment and make suggestions towards legislation. That was actually planned for this month, but due to COVID, both the Launceston and the Hobart venues were meetings were postponed, so that probably happen during June.
All right, okay. I'll open the item for discussion. Damon, Alderman Thomas, have you got any questions for Mr. Stevens?
Look, it's not so much questions, it's more observations. My sort of feeling is that there's clearly, with the weather we have at the moment, there's a changing pattern, a lot less usage of the bikes.
Scooters.
But I think it's no different to a lot of cities around Australia. There seems to still be a reasonable proportion of scooters abandoned on footpaths. You get collections at the bottom of Lower Sandy Bay, which seem to be really tidily parked. But I just don't know how we deal with the real issue that people with a disability scooter, a motorised transport, there's an incredible chance you're going to come across these scooters simply lying in the footpath, and there's no immediate way for those people to get to where they're going, and yet you see them there for hours in some cases. So I'm not sure whether it's because the two operators just aren't doing circuits enough, or whether or not there's anything we can do to rider behaviour, but I think it's a real issue, and I think it's not going away, and I think when we move towards the end of the trial and weather gets better, I think it's going to continue to be the bug in the ointment of this whole trial, that scooters are just recklessly left abandoned all over the place.
Okay, all right then. Thanks for that feedback.
I'm interested, Chair, as to how the operators can feed back to us how regular. I mean, we obviously saw particularly one of them doing a lot of circuits earlier on the trial, but just because it's winter, I would hope that we're still going to see a good pickup and recovery going on, because it's really not up to members of the public to pick these scooters up and put them back on the footpath where they belong.
Mr. Stevens, would you like to respond?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. So there are, I think there has been a reduction in the number of scooters left lying around. Whether that's completely due to the number of scooter rides diminishing through the colder weather, I'm not sure. But the scooter operators are very aware of this issue and are very responsive to being told that a scooter's been left in the wrong position, and they'll go and pick it up immediately. I think the issue is more when they're not aware, because they can't tell from their geofencing from their geolocation whether a scooter is on the side of the footpath or in the middle of the footpath. But that said, Beam has presented to us their new artificial intelligence units that sit on the front of the scooter that actually does tell them that kind of information. And this is brand new tech that's being trialled at the moment now in Hobart, and we're very much hoping that that will start to give us that kind of information. So for instance, already if a scooter has been tipped over, they are aware that the scooter has been tipped over, so they're very quick to go and pick up those ones. If a scooter is left at the wrong angle on the footpath, that's when the artificial intelligence agent takes over and starts to be able to identify where it's sitting in relation to the footpath and give the rider immediate feedback that they've parked it in the wrong place. But in any case, when people leave the scooters in the wrong place, there is a 3 strikes policy, and so people become aware pretty quickly that they are in danger of being kicked off those platforms if they're a continual abuser of those parking privileges. And I think that more than anything else has been the driver to people improving their behaviour, either because the people who are behaving the worst are being kicked off the platforms, or because people are realising that they're up to 2 strikes and they have to start behaving themselves. But that, at the moment, it does rely on members of the public calling up to say there has been a scooter parked in the wrong location, most times for them to be able to go and intervene, unless they happen to see it randomly while doing a round.
Does that help you, Damon? You're on mute.
Thanks for that. The only other thing, and it's a perception thing, and it's only what I continually see, but at least 20%, I'm being favourable there, are simply just, I mean, it's up to riders to wear helmets, and we've heard the stories about people not wanting to put on helmets because of what's been, where the helmet's been before, but they don't wear their own helmets, and I think that where the public perception will stand out towards the end of the year when this trial comes in for a landing, it's going to be that people are simply riding two on a scooter and riding without helmets. And the worst thing is you see the two people on a scooter and you see the helmet locked away in in the area in the front, and neither rider are wearing a helmet, and quite often it's a younger person who's being double dinged. And unless we get to the bottom of this, it's going to be dear old council being in trouble for having extended the trial, because there'll be this continual talk about, scooters all over the place and helmets not being worn. Now, it's obviously not reflective of the many people, the great majority that do follow the rules. And again, the drivers have got to be somewhat responsible for themselves. But if we're in a trial period, those two things I think are still as germane as they were when the issue came to council in January, with a lot of heat in the air.
Okay, thanks Damon, we've all heard that. Lord Mayor, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I guess just a question on the police and your meetings with them, and it's related to Alderman Thomas's comments. I mean, have they done any sort of blitzes or weekends of action on helmet wearing and doubling and that sort of thing? Because I think they've done it a couple of times in Launceston, and there was sort of a promise that they would do it, but once everything had settled down. But when are they going to do that?
Thank you. So through you, Chair, the police have moved from an education brief to an enforcement brief, and that's throughout Hobart and I think throughout Launceston as well. So that they are now actively enforcing rider behaviour, and they have, I don't have any statistics from the police, but they are booking people for exactly those issues. So the helmets and the double riding and the underage riding, and drink riding, that's their main issues. They were very keen that we had the opportunity to do educative programs first, and they were keen that it wasn't just everyone having fun and the police coming in with a big stick and spoiling. So while they were seeing poor behaviour, they weren't seeing the spikes in injuries and accidents that were making them, terribly concerned that people were in grave danger. But they were keen to see that those education campaigns were rolled out before they came in with an enforcement brief. We're coinciding with our main campaign, which is running right now, which is the campaign we've recently done with the Jack Jumpers, and that targets those things, drink riding and helmet riding and so on. So their enforcement has coincided with the launch of that campaign. So at the moment, people have lots of opportunities to know what the law is through those ads, and now finding opportunities to see what happens when you break the law. You've always been able to be banned from the platforms for breaking the law or for breaking the terms of service, and that has happened numerous times. So the police have now moved into a phase of booking people, and it's not so much a blitz, but it's just general policing.
So when you meet with them monthly, can we get those figures as part of the dashboard? Like how many? I can certainly ask them for it if they will give it to us. Sure. And also just how's the general usage going? Like how much has it dropped off in winter?
So there's been a fairly steady drop-off from the start of the trial down to now, the beginning of winter, and it seems to have levelled out. I'd say it's probably down to about a third of the usage in January, and the operators tell me that that's pretty standard, with both halfway through the trial, 6 months into a launch, and also colder weather. And Hobart's weather is not actually is actually quite conducive to scooter riding in winter, because it's really rain that keeps people off the scooters, and we usually don't have a particularly wet winter, and so those cold days don't seem to stop people, very similar to Canberra. But we think we're probably at about the low point now, and we probably see it picking up again towards the end of winter.
And does that mean that they've got less scooters out on, they've got less actual vehicles out on the streets now, given there's less use?
Yes, so through you, Chair, yes, that's correct. I mean, they put the scooters out in response to the business conditions, so they won't put more scooters out than are being used, and so we are seeing fewer scooters deployed. We'll probably see a boost in numbers during dark mofo, and I'd be expecting to see a lot of rides in that period. But otherwise, I think we've had something like 400,000 rides to date, and we had 50,000 rides in the first month, I think it was. So there's that kind of really big numbers at the beginning, and then a fairly steady decline down to the numbers now, and they deploy scooters commensurate with the demand they're seeing.
Okay, so I'm sorry. Okay, Alderman Barakis.
Thank you. I've got some similar concerns to what was raised, but I've got a few questions, and then I'll have my little rant. I'd also like to see the statistics from the enforcement, for one. I think that's a great idea. With the consultation with the older Tasmanian groups and the disability groups, were there any, I'm just sort of skimming through I'm going through the report, were there any particular concerns that were raised outside the ones that have already been sort of publicly disseminated, being people leaving the scooters in silly positions and sort of dangerous use of the scooters? Like, has there been anything new that we haven't sort of necessarily thought about that's come out of the consultation?
Through you, Chair, the main one that came out that was new was people who are on mobility scooters find the legislation unfair that scooters get to do a faster speed than the mobility scooters do. So mobility scooters are capped at a lower speed than e-scooters, and I asked whether they would like to see scooters slowed down or mobility scooters speeded up, and they said their real desire would to see the mobility scooters sped up. But
suppose a follow-up to that. This was a question I was planning on asking, and it might be one that you're not equipped to answer, but is the reason that those scooters are capped, are they still legislatively capped at that level, or are they, they're capped physically? There's things in the scooters stopping them from going any faster, and those things were set under previous legislation? Are they covered? Would they be covered by these sort of rules, or are they, like, now that the rules have changed, are they now able to do that speed, or would there be further regulatory changes that would need to happen for them to be able to have that parity with speed limits, I suppose, is the question.
So through you, Chair, so there are two types of speed limit. One is the legislative speed limit, and the legislation in Tasmania sets the maximum speed at 25 kilometres an hour, and on a footpath 15 kilometres an hour. I think the legislation for mobility wheelchairs sets them, mobility vehicles sets them at 10 kilometres an hour on a footpath. It's separate legislation, so the legislation for the scooters doesn't cover the mobility scooters at all.
So Chairman, there needs to be additional legislative change to bring that equality by the sound of it.
Yeah.
But also remember that if they're a bigger beast in a way, like they could do a bit more damage also at 25 kilometres an hour on a footpath. 15 kilometres, because they're a sort of more solid.
I wonder if it's worth, this is a complete aside to my sort of substantial concerns on this issue, and the Lord Mayor makes a good point about not just rushing ahead and doing it, but I wonder if it's worth potentially a letter from you as chair or whatever, or whoever would be more appropriate to relevant bodies, that this might be something that should be considered, at least in the context of what's been raised by disability groups.
Chairman, maybe a course of action there would be, if committee was of a mind, to refer that matter to the council's Access Advisory Committee and let them consider that item and decide if they'd like to take it
Would
forward.
that need an amendment or a motion?
Well, you could certainly, I don't think anyone's moved the motion, Chairman, so you could certainly add that as a number 5 if you wanted to.
That then. I'll move the motion. I won't be opposing any parts of the motion, so I'll move the motion on the books with that addition.
So that we ask the Access Advisory Committee to look at the issue of
To discuss it.
parity with mobility vehicles.
Yep.
Because I think they're also not allowed on the road, are they? So that might be more of a, like, on local roads, they, you know, if you can allow bikes and scooters on local roads, it does seem silly that they couldn't go on a local road.
And as you said, Lord Mayor, I think you make a good point. There's possibly reasons why the mobility scooters shouldn't be going as fast or shouldn't be going on the road, but I think it's possibly something that at least gets really looked at now with the context of this, and maybe there's things that come out that say that. But back onto the substantive issue, I do have one more question. You mentioned the artificial intelligence for detecting when scooters are parked inappropriately on footpaths, like and whatnot. Is that like a learning system, one that will get better over time, or is that one that just, you know, the software is what the software is, and this is as good as it's going to get effectively? Just in the context of, as Alderman Thomas said, there's a perception that these things are lying around for quite a bit of time before they're getting addressed.
Yes, so through you, Chair, they are on a learning. They work on a machine learning algorithm, so they get better as they get trained, and then it's also like a hive mind thing. So as one scooter learns something, all the scooters learn that at the same time. So it's a fairly steep, quick learning curve for the scooters to understand when they're doing the right or the wrong thing.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and sorry for taking up so much time. Look, my concerns about this, and I know that we've discussed this a few times, and I'm, on this council, a pretty big supporter of the scooters. I think there's definitely a long-term part for them to play in our mobility mix, so long as it's enforced and maintained in a sustainable way. And I think we need to be serious about that if it's to be successful in the long run, because I think the more incidences that happen, the more it will lose the public support. When I raised this last, I was told that the police were in a educative mode, not an enforcement mode. And the reason I'd be very interested to see the statistics is because I've I think maybe seen one occurrence where I've seen blatant misuse of the scooter enforced by the police. And by enforced, it was put your helmet on, and the person puts the helmet on. Cop yelling at the window. It's not uncommon for me to be down in Salamanca on Friday or Saturday night, and I do work around Salamanca during the day. And I see literally every single time I walk out, almost literally every single time I walk out on the street, whether it's during the day or whether it's at night time, somebody thinking on the scooters, as Alderman Thomas said, and usually when that's happening, it's with children. I've seen, the amount of time you see people just riding without helmets, and the amount of times on a Friday night or a Saturday night that you see people that are 100% not sober. And there's, cops will drive past just on their patrols, and all it takes is for something terrible to happen, and then for people to come out and say, this is why I was against scooters, this is why we need to get rid of them, and there goes the program. My personal view is I think the police need to take the enforcement of this a lot more seriously, and I've sort of been hesitant in saying this up until now because we've had that educative program, so I'd very much like to see the statistics, because personally my view is if it's a Friday night or a Saturday night and it's past 11 o'clock at night, I think it'd be a fair assumption to say that 95% of people on a scooter are probably not sober. There'd be the occasional person that's finished up something or finished a shift at work and they're catching a scooter home. But if people are hooning around Salamanca on a scooter at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's probably a fair bet that the cops should at least pull them over and check them out. The other thing, and I have raised this with people in the companies, because I do occasionally use the scooters, when you log on to use the scooter on both apps, it'll pop up, do you want to unlock the helmet or have you brought your own helmet? expressly I brought my own helmet, there's no requirement for it to click, the helmet doesn't unclip and you can ride around without, with your own helmet. I don't think I've ever seen a single person in this year riding a scooter with the helmet plugged in and they've brought their own helmet. That's not how this service works. It's a rental service. You use it at a convenience that you don't have to bring your own scooter and helmets and whatnot. The only people that tick I've brought my own helmet are people that don't want to use the helmet. It would be the most simple software setting change, to make that not an option. So if you want to use the scooter, you have to unplug the helmet. I think that would be the easiest way to probably increase the use of helmets on those things by 80–90%. So I am still, and I remain supportive of the program. I continue to use them when it's convenient for me, and it does save me a lot of time getting around the city on short trips. But I think everybody, council to a point, but I do think that across the board there needs to be a more serious enforcement of people that are using these things in the wrong way, because otherwise it'll be another case of the silly few ruining it for the majority of people that are doing it the right way. Just quickly on the topic of the scooters on footpath, the issue isn't so much that people are parking the scooters on the footpaths themselves, it's just that they're parking them in ways that obstruct. And does the artificial intelligence have any capacity to identify that? Like if somebody's parked it, sort of in a way that's out of the way, etc., the artificial intelligence can identify that?
You answered that, so
Yep.
say it again.
So through you, yes. So the artificial intelligence unit has got a camera on it, so it's looking at the view of the footpath, and so it starts to recognise not only that it's on a footpath, but it knows which footpath it's on. It learns which footpath it's on, and I think it's kind of fed with that information about how wide is this footpath and have there been complaints on this footpath, and then it's starting to look at which direction it's facing compared with the footpath, and giving the rider immediate feedback that they can't end their ride because they're not parked in a sensible way on that particular footpath.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So look, just to wrap up, and I thank the committee for my indulgence on this issue, but
We won't have to say it again now at council meeting.
I think it's important to note as well. I haven't reflected on the companies themselves, because I think for the most part they've been pretty good on this. The issue that at the end of the day, they want this program to succeed as well, because I would imagine they hope to have this be more than a 1-year trial. The issue is you have everyday users that have no real incentive or motivation to do the right thing when it's just convenient to leave a scooter wherever, or it's more convenient to just jump on it and not ruin their hair by putting a helmet on or not. So the issue is motivating people that don't have any other incentive to do the right thing, not the companies themselves. I think in this instance, it's those individual people that sort of might not care enough about doing the right thing here. But they do it for cars. People put their seatbelt on even if they don't want to, because they know they'll get booked. So if we can have that same mentality to scooters, I think we'll be going in a good direction. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
And you'll move the item?
Move the item with the addition of the Access Advisory Committee referral.
So we have some words for number 5, Chairman, if you'd like to hear them when appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. So you're all done? I'll have a go. So the 3 strikes. So if you park your scooter badly twice, you'll be warned, and then if you park your scooter badly 3 times, you could be banned.
Through you, yes. If you park your scooter badly once, you'll be warned. If you park your scooter twice, you'll be warned, and then if you park your scooter badly the 3rd time, you may be suspended or banned. So it depends on the nature of the action, but you can be banned.
Park it on the roof of a car. That's probably a ban.
Probably a ban. That's right.
Okay.
Or right through the.
Park it in the water.
Yep. So that does help. That does help me with understanding, the penalties. So in winter they deploy less scooters. So there's 300 for Beam and 300 for Neuron. So they're not putting out their whole fleet at the moment.
I can't tell you exactly how many they put out each day. I mean, I could go back and find out how many they're putting out each day, but in general, they will put out fewer scooters on days and times when there are fewer scooters being used. Yeah.
Okay. And just picking up on Alderman Barakis' point about the differential speeds or different speeds between scooters and disability scooters, I'm not arguing either way for that, but what I'd like to know is understand the rationale. Why do mobility scooters have a lower speed limit? So that's how I'd kind of to couch it to whatever the committees are we want to take that to. Because I agree with the Lord Mayor. A mobility scooter probably weighs, 10 times more than a scooter. So I guess it's a higher impact. I'd hate to be, run over by one of those versus a scooter. And also they occupy a lot more of the footpath and going at faster speeds with elderly folk who are in the scooter for a reason that might impact on their driving abilities. So happy to have that talked about in committees, but from a rationale perspective as well. Yep.
I don't think it's being referred to with any particular goal in mind. It was more just the concern was raised. Let's discuss it.
The different speeds under different legislation. So I'm happy to find out what's going on there. The mandatory helmets. Do we know if helmets, Australia's got a thing about wearing helmets for everything, but in the major bike riding nations, helmets are an optional thing rather than a mandatory thing. And I guess that's because we don't have safe infrastructure to ride bikes and scooters, because we've still got to mix it with cars. And and now the trend. We always talk about scooters and things, but we never talk about the number of very heavy SUVs that we now have populating the road, which people can't see. Or I drive a Tonka toy, and it's really annoying when you can't see to get out of a driveway because there's a big hunk of metal sitting there. But anyway, so helmets in other countries helmets on scooters in other countries? Is there a trend that we can pick up on? Are they mandatory or not in most places?
So through my understanding is that they're mandatory on the scooters as a condition of riding in most countries. I was talking to Beam the other day about New Zealand, where bike helmets aren't used, but scooter helmets are still mandatory, I believe. Mandatory through the company, not mandatory by law. And they do tend to see a lot of people using them, but they don't have the same awareness of how many people aren't, because it's just not an issue because it's not against the law, so it's not nearly as commented upon. But I can certainly find you more information about other countries.
I'm just curious to see whether helmets are mandatory in most countries and whether it's optional on scooters in most countries.
Companies may want to do it regardless because they're running these kind of, fairly high risk businesses. So they want to probably reduce the risk and reduce their insurance premiums.
Yep. And just part 2 of the recommendation, council officers from the City Smart and Sustainable Hobart unit liaise with City Mobility and Urban Futures with regard to the viability of creating more mixed-use micro-mobility lanes in inner city corridors. So that's about separated bike lanes, I imagine. Separated micro-mobility lanes, bikes, scooters, disability scooters, unicycles, whatever.
That's right. So that's about sort of the broader question of where is the most appropriate place for scooters to ride, and can we create more lanes where scooters and bikes can ride through the city without necessarily having to interact with either pedestrians or cars, and that's the goal, I think. So that question wasn't so much part of this report. We do, so the January 31st council session required a lot of feedback from officers, and I think there are 3 reports in total. This is the first of those reports, and there's another one, and then the consultant's report also to come, and that's around things like the footpath audits and other things that weren't, and they weren't requested as part of this first report.
Okay, all right. Look, I'm happy with the recommendation. I'll be supporting it, and I do like the idea of machine learning. And I, being a Star Trek kind of fan, I'm always been interested in the Borg. So I think that if I was going to start up a scooter company, I'd call it Borg.
Resistance is futile.
That's right. You will be assimilated, yeah, because these machines are going to take over the world once they work us all out. Yep. No, not really, but anyway. All right, so if there's no further discussion...
Just quickly, Chair, and just to bounce off something you said, about the helmets and the non-compulsory nature of them in some jurisdictions. I wonder if part of the reason for that is in those places where you say there's a grader up there, they're typically riding cities and places like that, I think you referred to. I wonder if it's because that in those areas there's, people are obviously quite well versed in their bicycles, people have bought their own bicycles, they're experienced in riding them, so the issue with them, there's a bit less, they're talking about advanced users, whereas I think the issue with the not just e-scooters, but the hireable e-scooters, is that you kind of have to deal with the lowest common denominator versus somebody that might be a bit more well versed in their own bicycle. From a safety perspective and insurance perspective, you're kind of expecting that you don't even need to have you don't even need to have any sort of license to go on the public road. You can jump on a scooter and hoot around the place. So perhaps that's a consideration as well. Yeah,
but I also think it's because there's a lot more bike infrastructure in many countries that have high levels of bike riding, compared to Australia. All right, I'll put the item. Any objections? No? Okay, we agree to that unanimously. That was good discussion. Thank you all. Hopefully we don't have to do it again.
I have to bite my tongue when it comes.
Still go aye at the next one.
I'll get up and do what you promised.
Okay, 6.2, City of Hobart Energy Use and Greenhouse Gas Emissions Annual Report. So again, this is a good news story, I think, for Council. We're continuing in the right direction. Do you want to give us a few introductory lines?
Bill, I'm happy to move that. And I think it's incredible how, through Mr Doyle and others at the time, you've managed to get that aquatic centre down to the extent that you have in terms of its overall emission. So Council's doing really well. It's a very impressive record that we've got to show there.
Yep. Okay. All trending down. Lord Mayor?
Yes. A couple of questions. I did send this through. I noticed that there were only 11 councils in the ICLEI Global Covenant of Mayors network that achieved what's called full compliance with its inventory. It was Auckland, Blacktown, Adelaide, Melbourne, Newcastle, Sydney, Yarra, Hobsons Bay, Wyndham, Wollongong, Wellington and Tweed and Yarra, and Hobart was not on that list of fully compliant inventory. So why are we sort of, because that means even though we're doing well, we're actually not sort of sitting at the level we probably should be for a capital city.
What's the program you're referring to?
It's the international accreditation that we report to, called under the Global Covenant of Mayors, but that's under the sort of the Carbon Disclosure Project is the people that manage their inventory, and
we participated in.
No,
I just want to make a comment. We participated in the pilot of that, if it's the one I'm thinking of, a few years ago, and our reporting exceeded what they were asking for. So, I know, but it's another thing that Rob has to do to fill it in. Anyway, but over to you, Rob.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So there are two. This is our corporate emissions report, and then the other question is our community emissions report, and the community emissions report for Hobart hasn't been submitted to GCOM at this stage, and the reason it sits with another area of council, but we are having discussions with them around getting that produced, and so I'd take on notice your question and we'll give you a response on that one.
That's the reason we didn't receive full compliance.
I reckon it's best to take that one on notice, Chairman, so as we can give you the full...
Yeah, because it's a bit like trying to say it's an Australian standard and everyone else has met it, but it's not a real standard, and we're better anyway. I mean, we've got to kind of go with what are the sort of benchmarks and the international benchmarks. And, you know, if there's going to be money around via, you know, the change of mood in the federal government, they're probably going to look at things like whether you're kind of, you know, compliant with an international standard. The other question I've got is, when are we going to start counting Scope 3 emissions?
Again, through you, Chair, I would take that one on notice and come back to you on that.
Is that sort of the next level where we, because you've got to be continuous improvement, and that's, I mean, I know there's continuous improvement of what we count, but then there's what we're not counting, which is Scope 3 emissions. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. This is all a pretty laudable achievement, I think, the pretty significant reductions in energy use and emissions. Just one question, and I may have just answered it myself as I'm reading it. If there was a cost differential as far as, you know, these reductions in emissions, but just reading that on page 19 as I'm flicking through, it says that there's been a pretty substantial saving. So I might give you the opportunity to speak to that. It may have turned into a Dorothy Dixer.
Through you, Chair. Yes. So almost all of the individual components of the greenhouse gas reduction that we've undertaken are cost positive over a period of time. So they end up saving the council money. So in all, the saving on our electricity bills has been in excess of $1 million a year. Particularly at the aquatic centre, there's some extraordinary work done with 300 kilowatts of solar on the roof, but then also we're pulling a megawatt out of the sewage system, and this is something that other councils around Australia are continuously asking us how that happened and how we did it. And so it's a heat exchange, so we've got wastewater flowing out through the wastewater network, has got residual heat in it, and we're able to extract that heat and use it to heat the aquatic centre. So there's lots of work that's been done by this council a number of years ago that has already paid for itself, and all the rest of them are on the way to paying for themselves. So most of the PV, the analysis we did a year ago or so, is that the PV systems are almost getting to the point where they've paid for their installation, and then they will have another 20 years of free energy for the council. So overall, apart from just meeting our greenhouse gas targets, the trickiest one, of course, being McRoby's Gully, because it's continuing to belch out methane, even though there's been some great mitigation done up there to generate energy from that source as well. But if we could take the methane away from McRoby's Gully, we've really cut extraordinarily deeply into our greenhouse gas emissions and energy use, with a benefit both in greenhouse gas emission reductions and costs to council.
Right. So just as a follow up to that line on 19, then when we talk about the $1 million in energy savings, is that just an energy saving, or is that like a net saving from what we've put into accomplishing this?
I think Chairman, I think what Robert was saying was that's the saving, and the various initiatives are almost paid for themselves now.
So we're effectively, it's more or less sort of cost neutral in that sense. Is that a rough way to say it, or in far as we've saved $1 million and then it's kind of paid for itself, we would say that it's more or less cost neutral?
So the $1 million goes on every year, so we continue to save that $1 million every year. And I don't know the full quantum, but say if we spent $7 million putting it all into place, then by the 7th year we'd have saved, and then beyond that we're just saving after that.
I didn't want to get too far into the weeds, so I didn't want to put that on you, but yeah, that answers the question.
I mean, we still have a life of 20 years in that technology.
So over the lifetime, we're expecting it to give us a net positive financially as well.
Not significant.
Yeah, great. I'm happy, Jack.
And that got better and better every year as technology got cheaper and cheaper.
And is there anything further we can do at McRoby's in terms of really increasing the capture up there?
I mean, the first
Needing
thing,
more
well,
energy generation.
first thing
or
we can do, Chairman, is follow our waste management strategy
course,
and
yeah.
stop putting stuff up there. As new cells are completed up there, we do have the capacity to expand the infrastructure to gather additional gas. I don't know whether Mr Stevenson looked at the potential for additional technology at Macrobies, but certainly we are expanding our network as our waste cells expand. Is there anything further, Rob?
Through you, Chair, I haven't looked at the possibility of expanding that program at Macrobies. On the page 7 of the report, I'm not sure where it sits in the agenda. Page 7 of the actual PDF report is headed "What intervention does." It shows what the amount avoided by landfill capture and the amount emitted by landfill capture, and you can see there's a starting to get now a fairly steep downward trend of what we avoid, and that's as you know. So the investment in continuing to invest in trying to capture a decreasing amount of methane may not be sort of effective in the end, because that is starting to now taper off. And as the director pointed out, the landfill strategy now will not continue to increase that methane. So we'll get faster and faster decrease in that emissions. I'm not exactly sure when that reaches kind of a 0 point, but it's not all that far away that it may not be worth putting in that. There's a diminishing returns for putting in more investment today with that, but it's certainly something we can look at through our partner up there.
Is that AGL?
So I thought
It's
the-
AGL, and my understanding is that they pretty much captured what they could, and the rest of it was fugitive because it's quite a difficult site to capture.
But they put that in years ago, so they might have.
It is going to be
a new
upgraded.
Generation.
There's ongoing upgrading processes,
okay.
and it's not that long ago, Chairman, that we actually went back to the market and renewed our arrangement. So that they certainly do progressive upgrades to that technology, both in terms of capture and the processing.
And something did come to committee, I think, 2 or 3 meetings ago. Yep. Damon, did you have any contribution?
No, I think obviously if we can keep up this work and keep the analysis going over a period, I think it grows well. How do we compare, if there is a comparative analysis able, with Launceston and perhaps Devonport in the state? I mean, they've got swimming pools as well. They probably face a lot of the same issues. Is there any comparative analysis available overall?
Not that we're competitive or anything, but yep.
Of course.
So through you, Chair, I won't. I'll take that one on notice. Okay, yeah.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to move it if it hasn't been moved, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, you've already moved it. You've moved it twice. You've moved it twice now.
Thank you.
Twice moved.
Can I ask about our emissions? 25,000 tonnes per annum at the moment. Or sorry, just less than 25, about 24,000 tonnes per annum at the moment. It's down from 24,000 tonnes to about 18,000, 19,000 tonnes per annum. That's correct?
Yes, since 2010, yes.
Yeah, okay. And other cities claim carbon neutral status because they buy carbon credits. So for us to buy 25,000 tonnes, sorry, not 25,000 tonnes, 19,000 tonnes. So 19,000 times, what's about $30 a tonne at the moment? Yeah. So our philosophy still the same, that rather than purchase credits, that we'll continue to invest in efficiency. It's still the same philosophy that we've had all this time.
So through you, Chair, yes, that is the philosophy, that we would invest in local programs rather than invest in carbon credits, but obviously the council is free to make a decision on that.
Okay.
And I think, Chairman, it depends on the new world with our new federal government and what opportunity that might provide us. If there's further incentives for us, then we can obviously explore how we can take advantage of that.
Okay, yep. And I'm also interested in how we get out of natural gas. I see our profile from that's dropped significantly, but we still have a number of natural gas. I think there's a bit of a symbolic thing as well with getting out of natural gas from a fossil fuel, you know.
I can take that, Chairman. We a few years ago we did some work to look at natural gas fueling some of our fleet, and we.
I'm talking about getting out of it.
Yeah,
getting into it. Yep.
Yeah, no. But a few years ago we got into it for a trial to see what it might offer to us, and there were certainly some financial incentives for the council to do that. Now, in terms, and I'm not sure what other natural gas we use, but certainly when it comes to the fleet, it's been far less than successful. As the committee knows, we're in the process of moving our light fleet to electric or at least hybrids, and we're well progressed in that stage. We need to look at utes and trucks because at this stage electric doesn't cut it, but certainly the advice to me is that hydrogen might not be that far away. And we will be getting out of those gas vehicles as soon as we can. I think now perhaps we wouldn't, you know, if there's other technology not far away, we may not revert immediately back to diesel, but you know, we'll optimise the life of them. But certainly the advice to me is that it's not something that we'd be investing more heavily in. And I'm not sure, Rob, whether we've got other natural gas usage apart from those vehicles.
So the main uses of natural gas are barbecues.
Okay.
And the second one, surprisingly, is the eternal flame at the cenotaph, which is actually quite a large quantity of gas, which would be really interesting to set that up with a hydrogen source instead. But I don't know where.
And look, Chairman, and certainly, Chairman, both of those areas are problematic to the council for other reasons. So that could be an initiative that we do look at as something new.
Those sort of gas stoves that have the kind of flames, are they real or are they a kind of a
Hologram gas light.
hologram? Yeah.
Solar-powered hologram.
There certainly is an expense with the flame at the cenotaph that wasn't necessarily identified early on, but I think we'd have to work closely with the veteran community. But if we could come up with an alternative, there could be a win-win there.
Yeah, because I've mentioned this to a few people now. How do we move away from gas? And the eternal flame is the one we've looked at, and we've not laughed about it, but thought about, you know, do you need a gas flame, or could you have an LED setup where you could, I don't know, change the colours for various times of the year or moods or whatever it is. But it'd need a very detailed conversation with the RSL.
And is it reliable? Is it pretty good? Because sometimes I've been up there and it's not going.
Yeah.
I don't actually look
There have been issues, Chairman, Lord Mayor, through you, Chairman. There have been some issues with the flame, particularly in the early days. But my understanding is that they've addressed those in recent years. But I still think exploring an alternative for both that and the barbecues would be a good outcome.
And there's also a few kitchens as well, I think, that have gas. Like Mater's house, I think, still got gas stoves. Even though it's not probably a huge amount, it's still the getting out of fossil fuel approach that I think council should be pursuing. All right, no further comments. Been moved twice by Alderman Thomas. So I'll put that. Any dissent? No dissent? Okay, declare that carried.
Get a fleet of cyber trucks.
All right. Item 7 is committee action status report. Would somebody like to move that? Item 7.1. Thanks, Alderman Barakis. No dissent. Declare that carried. Responses to questions. We have a couple of responses there. Can I have someone move those? Same again. Alderman Barakis. Questions without notice. Anyone?
Yeah, I have questions that I said I would ask on behalf of the Lena Valley community, which is, will the Lena Valley local area mobility plan be able to commence prior to a permanent manager mobility commencing. Secondly, what timeframe does council staff expect? It's sort of all a bit linked, really. Do council staff expect to commence community engagement on the local Lena Valley local area mobility plan? And once a LAMP is created for an area, what are the next steps to begin implementing mobility improvements to an area? And fourthly, is there already funding set aside in the capital works budget to fund infrastructure projects that are identified in LAMPs?
I reckon, Chairman, the best answer is that we'll take those on notice.
Yep, sure.
And
Do you need all
provide.
those?
All right, okay. No other questions? Okay.
Let me see. Oh, yeah, actually I do have a question. There are some parking spaces that have been removed on the northern side of Argyll Street between Liverpool and Bathurst Street. They seem to be permanently hooded, and I was just wondering why that was.
I'll take that on notice too, Chairman, so we can come back to you.
We're good? Okay. All right. Would somebody like to move that we go into the closed? Thank you, Honourable Maragos.